In the early 2000s, Kia was still seen as a scrappy, irrelevant automaker of disposable cars. However, models started to slip through the cracks that didn't completely suck. So let's imagine that, bolstered by these successes, Kia decided to take on the popular sports sedan market. We'll base this design off the contemporary Optima, which was released in North America for the 2001 model year. After picking a body which matched the proportions pretty closely, I decided to use the largest and most powerful of its engines as the basis for this car's powertrain. The top-end Optima was powered by the 2.7-liter Delta V6, a typical modern engine which produced an acceptable 170 horsepower. By fitting it with some performance cylinder heads and dialing in the tuning, it produced far more, only because I forgot to shrink the displacement. After I did, it made a respectable 210 horsepower. I decided to make it front-wheel drive, but threw in a simple viscous limited-slip diff to try and mitigate understeer. From here, I gave it some pretty basic internals. After all, Kia's biggest selling point was affordability. After fixing up some settings, I moved on to styling. I wanted to try and match the styling of the Optima as closely as possible, but with some sportier touches. I threw on some chrome 2000s taillights as well as some sporty lips at the front and rear. I eventually tacked on a hood scoop for that final piece of tacky flair. Weirdly, you can get the Sedona minivan with one as well. I think this was only used for the turbo diesel. The engine has a strange warble to it, and I wasn't sure if it was induction or exhaust noise. The car performs about how I expected, with 0 to 60s around the 8-second mark, tons of wheel spin, and mediocre low-end performance. Handling is pretty poor, and it feels like this just has an open diff. This car does not feel super nimble. Now for its closest imaginary competitor, the Pessima GTZ, which handles better and goes faster. Again, this is 2000s Kia we're talking about here. This thing is not meant to win anything. After performing some safety testing and turning it into a Prius, I moved on to the handling tests. On the Top Gear test track, the car's cornering troubles were made pretty evident. Accelerating out of a turn results in one-wheel peels or no acceleration whatsoever, and it's difficult to judge the limits of grip when entering a corner. It's an acceptable performer, but leaves a lot to be desired. So what we've made is a somewhat endearing, if objectively mediocre, cheap sports sedan. This definitely wouldn't have had the same impact as the Stinger we got, far from it, but it might have set Kia on an even quicker path of advancement, or they could have been laughed out of the performance sector entirely. Unfortunately, we'll never know.